Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Argan. In this video I'd like to show you another budget build. This time it's for a Barbarian Tank. This build should get you through most any of the random queued content. So this build will basically be for everything apart from your Infernal Citadel or your Trials Zarya or Tara the Mad Mage. So let's get started. First up we're going to have a look at our powers. This is generally the setup I use for all the situations of tanking, including boss fights and AoE mob fights. So first things to look at is primarily our feats, to choose the right ones for kind of your setup. So in the first set here, I've chosen Frustrating Slash. The reason for this is it's helpful for both mob fights and boss fights. If you look here at Leap into Action, it only buffs your Mighty Leap, which is this leap power, kind of AoE. It's not too great on the damage front, however it's AoE, so it's relatively good in an AoE situation. However, that's the only time you're going to use it. Whereas the Frustrating Slash buffs your Sentinel Slash, which will essentially give you that buff of aggro threat generation for 10 seconds. And thus I prefer it over the Leap into Action feat. On our second set here, I have chosen Indomitable Might over the other feat, Sure Slam. The reason for this, Indomitable Might is a power you can switch out to when you're against bosses. Essentially, this power will just up its magnitude. The other one, alternative to that, is our Sure Slam, essentially giving our single target power, the Sure Strike, the ability to proc a buff to our Bounding Slam, essentially giving it an extra 100 magnitude. It's decent, it's alright for boss fights, but again, you would be better off running these two at will powers just for that extra threat generation rather than the extra damage that the Sure Slam would give you via using Sure Strike and Bounding Slam. Then for our third set of feats, I've chosen On the Move. The reason for this is it helps the party kind of move a lot faster through dungeons and whatnot. Essentially what you do is, you can see my setup here, I'm using Not So Fast. Essentially it will buff it so that you gain 20% move speed for 4 seconds. So what you do is you cast it and immediately cancel the animation from the cast time, and you'll gain that buff and it will have cast it. And therefore you're not like slowing down. You can see I'll cast it one more time, but this time I won't cancel it. See, I'm just running along, I hit the cast, and you see I get delayed there for quite a period of time. Let's just kill these mobs real quick. That dude was making some god horrendous noise while I was up here. Alternative to that, you could take Disarming Takedown. Essentially it will give a nice damage buff to the DPS in your party, essentially buffing this takedown power. However, it is a single target attack, so it's again only good against like boss fights and against like single target kind of mob fights. But it is pretty decent and I would recommend taking it. However, when you're running through dungeons and stuff where you just want to keep moving, I believe On the Move is definitely a good buff, giving you that 20% move speed to everybody if they're close enough to you. On our fourth set of feats, I prefer to take Undying Instinct and generally don't even use either of them, so we'll move on. We go then to the last set of feats. This kind of sets your playstyle and how you want to play. I prefer to take Rage and Rally. Essentially, when you use your Rage, which will be your tab power here, you'll gain a increase to amount of threat you'll generate while in that rage effect through this feat. And also once your rage ends, you'll gain up to 40% of your maximum stamina based on the amount of rage you used. It's pretty good for increasing that survivability, especially when you're in a rage effect. You'll notice that you don't have to block any attacks, you won't have to do any of these blockings, and when mobs attack you, you'll just lose essentially the stamina while you're in that rage, rather than losing any of your HP. So it's nice then when you come out of that rage that it will restore some of this stamina that you have lost while fighting. However, the second feat here, it doesn't work too great. It's good when you're against mobs and bosses that hurt you a ton. The reason for this is if we look at actual Primal Fury here, because that is what Blood Fury is essentially buffing. Primal Fury, it looks great and all, with a 600 magnitude. However, this magnitude is only at 600 when you have no stamina left. So it requires a lot of timing, and it requires you to be doing content where mobs will actually do enough damage to deplete this stamina like relatively quickly, so that you can use Primal Fury relatively often. Because what I find when I use it, you're never really low on stamina, because most of these content in these random queues is not particularly challenging, albeit there are a few, but I still think the Rage and Rally is much more beneficial. So let's go then to the powers I would generally use. So at wills, definitely just use a Challenger Slash, this at will for basically everything. For AoE attacks, it's an arc attack, 260 degrees, and also against bosses because of that increased threat. It'll essentially multiply the effective damage you deal to the target, essentially the amount of damage the target thinks you've done, and it will do a lot more effective damage than like Sure Strike, which does have an increased magnitude. And our secondary one there, using Sentinel Slash, essentially there's no point charging it up, you just quickly tap it and release it, and essentially you'll gain this bonus to threat for 10 seconds against pretty much all targets, because it will just be a buff to you up here in this buff bar. For then our encounters, our main one here is Punishing Charge. Essentially it's a lunge attack up to a range of 60 feet, and you can use your class feature here, Challenger's Charge, essentially giving this Punishing Charge a hard taunt effect. The second one I like to use is Come and Get It. Essentially again, it's a hard taunt, placing you at the top of the threat list. However, this time it's an AoE one, so it's good for when you're fighting those mobs. Punishing Charge is just good for mobility, and also just a hard taunt one of those big mobs, or also just a boss fight while in single target. Come and Get It, definitely good for AoEs. You'll draw in enemies around you to get them closer to you, and you'll also hard taunt them, placing you on top of their threat list. However, again, this one won't actually deal any damage, so you want to make sure your allies or you have done a significant amount of damage to them. When the mobs are about 75% life, damaged by about 25%, that's when I would use it, just so you can easily more so sustain that aggro upon them. Then for my third one, I generally like to use Not So Fast when you're running through a dungeon. However, when you do get to a boss fight, using Enduring Shout is definitely very beneficial, increasing your HP by 20% and healing you for the amount increased as well. Alternatively, you could use Ignore Weakness, essentially increasing that stamina by 50%. However, the stamina will be increased the lower amount of HP you are. Onto our dailies, I generally like to use Crescendo, if that's how you pronounce it. Essentially it's a single target daily, essentially giving you a ton of damage. I generally use it at the beginning of a boss fight, just so you can get ahead of the DPS there on kind of damage done. And Battle High, essentially good for survivability, increasing that HP by 35% and healing you for the amount restored. Class features, as I mentioned earlier, definitely just takes Challenger's Charge, and the other one just take Mighty Vitality, increasing your hit points by 10%, and however it will decrease your power, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. The increase of HP is definitely much more beneficial and definitely pays off the cost of reducing your power by 5%. Alternative one you could use is essentially here Threatening Presence, increasing your threat generation. So that's pretty much it for powers. Let's go to kind of the gear I generally recommend. For this budget build, definitely just take the gear which has the highest item level. Currently what I'm using is just the highest item level gear that's kind of decent for a tank. Either gives like here buffs to damage resistance, or here deals damage to targets when you deflect, and so stuff like that. Or Clingy Leather Coat, where you essentially will draw in targets or deal damage to them if they're immune to being drawn in. All this gear gets me up to a total of 20 just over 20,000 item level, effectively allowing me to queue up for the random dungeon queue here, which has a requirement of 20,000 item level. You can see here the gear setup is definitely not ideal. I could definitely switch out my headpiece to something of more higher item level. So yeah, as a tank, just take the highest item level gear you can find. It will buff you with the most HP. And if you want to go into the nitty gritty stuff, you can look at which stats you're missing and try and get the pieces which have the stats you kind of need. For your weapon set, just try and get the highest item level set you can. I'm currently using the Lionheart set since I had the privilege to obtain them in Tower of the Mad Mage. Alternatively, you guys could grind out the new Legion Guard set, or even just purchase the Hellfire Engine set from the campaign store with the new campaign that just came out, Path of the Fallen. So yeah, that's pretty much it for gear. For artifacts, I'm still running with like the luck charms and whatnot from essentially the gear you obtain when first starting out on Undermountain, and then I'm running with my Sigil of the Paladin, which you get from essentially doing the quest Vault of the Nine on a level 60 Paladin, and then you'll have it unlocked for all your characters. Now let's move on to our companions. Ideally you would use an augment companion here. Like here I'm using the Black Dragon Ion Stone. You can see here it's a augment because of this bonus here, and it gives a bonus also to these additional stats here. Runestones, you just want the highest rank runestones you can get. I'm just using some cheap ones here. And for companion equipment, you ideally want, as a tank, to cap your critical avoidance and your defense, along with your armor pen to start with. As you can see here, my defense definitely capped for pretty much all the queued content. You want to get your stats to about 68,000. That's kind of the maximum content you'll be going up against. That's Lair of the Mad Mage. The ratings in there you want to be having is 68,000 armor pen. You want to be having your 73,000 critical avoidance, just to make sure that none of the mobs will crit on you, since they'll do a good amount more damage. I believe it's 75% more damage if a target crits on you. And of course you want that defense capped so that you have that 50% damage resistance. That being capped at 68% for Lair of the Mad Mage. And if you have it capped for that, you should be capped for all the other content, I believe, when you queue up. So what I'm using is currently these ivy grown ones, essentially both of them buffing my critical avoidance and also my deflect, which is pretty nice. And then this last one here giving me armor pen and defense. Then for kind of our passive abilities, you ideally want all the ones that will buff your HP. The cheapest one here being the Energon, giving you that 24,000 HP on just purple hair. I believe you can buy it for like 10 to 20,000 Astral Diamonds on the auction house. It's fairly cheap. The other ones can get more expensive. The Cave Bear here is also, I think, relatively cheap. However, they get a lot more expensive because these are like the best in slot ones. You have like the Moonshade Druid, and then I'm just using other ones, which you can see here I don't actually have any other ones to particularly choose from for my defense. But ideally you just want ones that buff HP here. Again, you can look up an endgame Barbarian Tank build and you'll figure out exactly which ones you should be kind of going for. For mounts then, generally for the insignia bonuses themselves, I like to just get some Gladiator's Gals. You can get up to a maximum of 3 of them that will actually benefit you. And then I'm using Barbarian's Revelry just for that extra kind of heal whenever I critically strike. The other one here is actually useless here for me since I'm not using a companion that attacks. For my other one here, I don't have anything that will buff my HP, so I'm just going with power there. And that's pretty much it. I guess I should probably mention ability scores. Now, for here you can see I have it incorrect. Ideally as a tank you want all constitution since it just recently got a buff and it basically got fixed for that maximum HP bonus. So ideally you should have all constitution here, and you should have like all charisma or all strength. That's kind of your choice. I prefer charisma here because of that companion influence, more stats, and also that recharge speed to reduce those massive cooldowns. Strength will give you that stamina regen, giving you more guard, and that also physical damage boost. So again, make sure you slot all your points in Constitution for your tank build. So that's it, I think, for this build. In the next video that I'll upload, I'll show you how I actually use this build to complete kind of most of the content within random queues. I'll queue up and we'll see what we get. However, if it's a really easy dungeon, I won't record it and I won't put it in the video. If it's something like Lair the Man Mage or Castle Ravenloft, I'll consider making the video out of it, and I'll have that uploaded pretty soon, within a day or two. Hopefully this can help you for those new player barbarians who wish to do some tanking, and to just kind of have a cheap build for it, and just have the right setup, and you should be able to get through most of all the content fairly easily. So I hope you liked what you saw here, hopefully it was helpful. If you did, consider leaving the video a like. If you're new around here, consider subscribing, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.